We have a quorum, and Commissioner Taney said he would try to join us by Zoom, but he might not be able to in Monahan. All right. We're here a presentation from Mike Meeks from Meek and Associates and a discussion of the following recommendations for economic development policies, programs, and guidelines and criteria to include county resolution and adopting guideline criteria for tax abatements and rebates pursuant to Chapter 312 of the Tax Code and Property Redevelopment and Tax Abatement Act. And a recommendation for the county to adopt a community and economic development program pursuant to Chapter 381 County Development and Growth and Local Government Code. And additional recommendation and options for economic development. Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Judge. I am Michael Meek. In Rawls is my residence, but I consider Rockport and Aransas County my hometown. So I enjoyed meeting Commissioner Rousseau and Commissioner Laubach this morning. And of course, I know you, Judge, from the past, as well as Commissioner Casterline. So I'm glad to be here this morning. And I'll try to move through these as quickly as possible. But I wanted to start with a slide that talks about another step forward, because this is another step. It's an important step, of course, but it is another step in all the work that this county has done in the recovery since Harvey. And of course, the workshop today is about the long-term recovery plan that was adopted in August 2018. However, the policies that we're going to be talking about today will further facilitate the execution of that plan. I call it putting some more meat to the bones. Now, the local government corporation received a request from the county late of I believe it was December of 2020. And they asked for the LGC to make some recommendations on changes to your expired tax abatement policy, identify some targeted industries that the community should pursue, and also some other economic development incentives. So the local government corp asked the economic corporation under their umbrella to return with some recommendations. That was in February of this year regarding things like Chapter 12 and those target industries. And then the LGC has seen presentations on these various possibilities and processes this past April, and as well as this past Friday, October 1st. So again, your guidelines did expire 2013. They were amended in 2016, but of course that's expired as well. Of course, you have these types of policies because you want lower unemployment in your county. You want to have strong local businesses. And it says increase tax revenues, but it should say increase commercial tax revenues, because that's really the goal here, as well as to attract high quality jobs. So I went back and looked at, in fact, I brought Judge with me. You saw this last Friday, and so did you, Commissioner Casterline. This is all the various and sundry studies that were done for Aransas County, and Rockport and Fulton, others post Harvey. It's a lot of great information. I use that to inform myself of what those targeted sectors should be. And it started off with A&M Corpus, looked at the impact of Harvey. They gave you a report back in November of 2017. The key takeaway from that report was the need for a more diverse economy. My good friend Sean Garrickson with Pegasus in Austin came down and did a housing recovery plan. If you look at his to-do list of what to do, he talked about utilizing things like things in the local government code, Chapter 312, which is tax abatements, Chapter 380s for cities, Chapter 381s for counties, which you've utilized in the past, tax increment financing, which we'll talk about here this morning as well, and also fee waivers. Another great report from the International Economic Development Council, IEDC. They came up with an action plan, and they came down to the community at their expense, and they held focus groups, got a lot of community input. In fact, a lot of these studies that we're talking about today had a lot of bottom-up community input. The key takeaway was economic diversification. They even gave a 5-year window to accomplish these things. I'm sure back 2019, that seemed like a long way away, 2018, 2019. But now when you say 2023, that doesn't sound like it's very far away. They suggested that you create an economic development organization. That's been done. That you diversify your economy with some of these new targeted industries. We're going to be talking about that today. Adopt multi-jurisdictional incentive policies. That's on the docket. To grow your existing businesses, but do that utilizing things like Chapter 312 and Chapters 380 and 381. They said also address your infrastructure to recruit some of these businesses. There's some of these sectors that I'm going to be suggesting that if you had better broadband, it would be a lot easier to do that. So that's going to be a key infrastructure for this county to have is better fiber broadband. It'll make you more business recruitment ready. You're already dealing with your healthcare gaps, utilizing some great federal grants to move that ball down the field. You're talking with Mike Gear, your airport director, about utilizing your airport more and how to take care of some surplus lands that could return more value to the county. Workforce needs, big day today at 3:00 at your Workforce Development Center with that event. So you're making progress there. And these businesses are going to need sites and buildings to do this. So that long-term recovery plan that I mentioned, that was adopted by this commissioner's court or by a commissioner's court at that time, the city of Rockport, the town of Fulton, your NAV district, and your chamber was born out of 4 focus groups, 11 separate meetings between December of 2017 and April of 2018. And of course, it had a big section in there on economic development. What was the big priority? Again, you see the words diversification, economic diversification. And they talked about having assets inventory. I'm working with the EDC on that. That's going to be on the revised website that Carl Hatman is working on. I'm going to have a meeting today with him at 1:30. They said we need to have a target sector assessment. We've got that done. You're going to be seeing that here in a moment. That it's important to import new dollars into your community. That's what economic development is. But if it leaks out quickly and people spend their paycheck somewhere else instead of shopping here in Aransas County, then that's a problem because that money quits circulating in town. So we've got some leakage issues that needs to be taken care of. You've got a lot of great plans, a lot of things happening in your downtown areas. So some of those plans could be consolidated. That would be better. As well as your administrative offices to be downtown Rockport as well. And then, of course, in August 2018, they were talking about flooding issues then. So that persists to be an issue, especially when you have a 20-inch rain. And lastly, form an EDC, which has been done. The second priority was wrapped up in things that we call business infrastructure, like your workforce needs, being business recruitment ready, addressing your healthcare gaps, leveraging your airport, and addressing business sites and buildings. So all those are key things that make up the tapestry of a comprehensive economic development program. There was also a resiliency assessment done by Carrie Tyndall in March of 2019. And again, they talked about the cultural arts districts in your downtown areas, the need for flood mitigation, the need for better infrastructure, coordinating those anchor and waterfront developments. There's that Chapter 312 again. It keeps popping up. This is, I think, the second time it's popped up already in some of these suggestions by these other entities. Rockport Fulton had a regional study done on community resilience by IC Squared, University of Texas in Austin in March 31st of this year, of last year, excuse me. And of course, they talked about basic economic development, and that's bringing in new capital into your community. The way you do that is to offer incentives in exchange for that capital and those jobs and that economic activity. That's just economic development 101. The Texas General Land Office and Commissioner George P. Bush in August of 2020 did a resilience strategy. And there were 7 different takeaways from that. I highlighted the need for better internet. Your Council of Governments in Corpus, where it's based, said the same thing. So that is huge for this county to do all these things, but that broadband will help you get some of these targeted industries landed. So back in April of this year, the LGC did receive an overview on all the various incentive possibilities and processes. They talked about what I mentioned a while ago, this chapter 380, 381. That's different from your chapter 312, which is property tax abatements. Chapter 381 for counties puts everything on the table at your disposal. It's a much more flexible tool for you to negotiate with somebody, utilizing county assets or future revenues to come in. And it's not, chapter 312 is just about property taxes and the use of that. Chapter 381, as you could see, can be a myriad of different things. There's also something that the city of Rockport is looking at, and that's public improvement districts. That's usually in a downtown area where the owners of the property in a particular commercial area all vote to pay more taxes than the current tax rate, and to put that extra tax revenue in a fund to help pay for public improvements in their area. The PID that I've proposed to the city of Rockport would take 100% of those property owners to agree to do that, to have themselves taxed more than the current tax rate. But another tool that cities and counties use is Chapter 311, tax increment financing. And that's where you, again, use those funds to repay the cost of public improvements. But you do that by creating usually a commercial boundary, and you issue bonds, and then only the new added value increment goes toward the payment of the bonds. Your current values aren't touched. So that's a different way that you could put some public improvements in needed areas. Another study was done. Let me click all these up here real quick. Oh, sorry. The city of Rockport's comprehensive plan that they're looking to adopt, that will be a 20-year plan. That's a generational plan. And the key sections in that plan on economic development talks about resiliency, and they specifically mention Chapter 311, which is tax increment financing. It talks about utilizing Chapter 312. Of course, you have opportunity zones in the county. That's a federal incentive policy. Of course, they talk about the need for skilled workforce. That's why you're working so hard on your workforce development center. My role here since August the 4th has been to come in and help the EDC create a business retention and expansion template that Barbara is using now. She's making calls around the county to businesses there and ascertaining what their needs are. Those needs will help greatly in their EDC work plan over the next several years. And it'll also, the timing of this is good because for your grant application that you're working on for the furniture and fixtures for your workforce development center, Delmar is needing to know what those employers need in skills and what kind of people or how many people they could hire that's going to come out of that campus. And so that's current data that's being mined right now. I was also asked to help create a community asset inventory. And again, your webmaster for the EDC, Carl Hatman, is about to revise that website, and site selectors and companies go on a website and they get the information before they ever call you. You may never get a call because you are usually eliminated from your website, or you're left on the list because of your website as these companies are looking on where to locate their next company. So very important that get done. I was also asked to develop these targeted business sectors. And the reason why I've grouped these with your different policies is because they really need to be hand in glove. And so you can see throughout the suggested policy documents, these 10 business sectors are interwoven in those policy documents there. So, let me emphasize, go back there and emphasize that having these policy documents means that it places you in the control, proactive position, not a reactive position. It provides you a process to evaluate these requests, and it provides maximum return on investment to you. There is no obligation on the part of Aransas County to utilize or do a deal with anybody ever, but it's at your disposal. You have it in case it's needed. And so I'll be talking about that in a minute. Let's talk about these targeted industries. Again, We all know that the hospitality and tourism sector is dominant here. It likely always will be because of your unique location on the Gulf Coast. But following August 2017, it was a pretty clear indication from everyone that you need to have a more diversified economy, especially even in the hospitality and tourism sector. So we looked at all these. We wanted to make sure that site selectors and companies know what's important to Aransas County and what you're looking for. And we want the ones that are going to provide the greatest return on investment. So let's talk about these are, by the way, not in, I'm sorry, yes.
Can you give me an example of what it means to diversify the tourism industry? What
Sure.
kind of things are there that we don't have?
Well, yes, of course, you're really strong here in your tourism that's tied to natural resources related to fishing and the beach, anything outside. But when something happens in the environment, or you have other issues that keep people from getting in the water, or you can't fish, then there's other kinds of tourism like group meetings, cultural tourism, heritage tourism. So as those are strengthened, those are not weather dependent as much. And so that's what I mean by that. Okay. So again, no particular order other than this is alphabetical. But because of your great airport, Aransas County Airport, which my father flew out of for about 30 years, and so I'm very familiar with it. It's a great asset to this county and the region, and it's got a lot of potential for development. Corporate and regional offices is the second one that, again, alphabetically, with the explosion of telework and telecommuting with COVID, Aransas County is well situated for this growth with people to work from home. There's a lot of people in this nation now working from home. Why wouldn't they want to be in Aransas County to do that? So with the right broadband infrastructure, that could certainly happen. Number 3 is information technology. The need for broadband expansion, again, will help there. And you could probably even have a lot of private investment join in with you so that the county and the cities don't, and the taxpayers don't have to bear the total brunt of this. Major tourism entertainment venues, again, as your Rockport and Fulton downtown areas flourish more, excuse me, they're going to be more attractive to cultural and arts heritage venues that we talked about a while ago. And you could also probably attract some more private investment into these downtown areas as well. And let's not forget that such investment can be shaped to help fund needed infrastructure such as drainage. Marine related, this is one that you're not going to see across Texas on too many lists. But with the community located on the Gulf of Mexico and multiple bays, water-related businesses producing products could thrive here and be of service to the many fishing guides that you have and other retailers specializing in fishing gear. Medical is another one. Residents are in much need of full-service medical facilities as well as additional elderly care and other type facilities. And of course, you're making a lot of progress on that. Post-secondary education, again, progress has been made with your Workforce Development Center. Del Mar College is a willing partner, but you're going to see when they start producing graduates, companies are going to want to be close to where the labor is. And so that's going to help recruit good companies here to Aransas County. R&D, it's clean, it's high wage. It could flourish here, especially with your access to your nearby environmental habitat, abundant sunshine, high quality of life. And I've included biosciences in this section as well. Retail, of course, I mentioned leakage. And when you look at leakage studies, again, where people are taking their paycheck that they receive here, their monies that they receive, and they go spend it in Corpus or somewhere like that. You've got a lot of things happening in that leakage area, like with auto dealers, general merchandise, department stores, clothing stores, health and personal care products, electronics, and appliances. So that's going to be huge to try to stem the tide. And of course, when you get some of these medical facilities built with the federal grants you have, that's going to stem some of the outgoing tide of the medical leakage that you have as well. And finally, workforce housing. Of course, we all know about the population losses during Harvey. Affordability is a key major issue here. And so you've got to provide housing for your labor force to sustain your economy. And so providing housing for all income levels is certainly essential. So on this part of the presentation, I'm going to be diving more into the incentives piece and why this is so important. I think it's critical that we recognize that economic development, basically incentives, is a public purpose in the state of Texas. That's codified into state law. And even as important, companies and site selectors are looking at your website first to see if you have policies in place. And if you don't, a lot of them move on. So it's important to have those policies there just to start the conversation. Ray Perryman, a noted economist, in fact, a Nobel Prize nominated economist, wrote a paper called The Market for Prosperity in October of 2019 that the Texas legislature utilizes when they look at incentive policies. And again, he talks about primary jobs being the foundation of that. And if you look at it from a 30,000-foot view, there's really three ways to bring in new money in a community, right? There's tourism, which you do a great job with. There's transfer payments, which is basically retirement funds and Social Security. And then there's primary jobs, not just any job, but a primary job. And a primary job is different because that's an employer that creates a product or a service here, but they sell it outside your trade area, but they import the money back here. So that's new money that comes here. So you have tourists that come from San Antonio and Houston to fish or to spend the weekend, or you have winter Texans that come from the winter. The money they bring with them wasn't earned here, but it's spent here. So that's a form of new wealth, just as retirees that live here. And I used to tell my dad when he was totally retired that his job was to go to the mailbox because he had a check from the Air Force, he had a check from the state of Texas, he had a check for flying for the Bass family over at San Jose Island. I said, Dad, your job is to go to the mailbox. So that was money that wasn't earned in New Braunfels, but he got, that money was spent in New Braunfels for the following month. So that was new money coming into town. And so Rockport does a good job in Francis County on two of these three. But the struggle, the challenge is what do you do on primary jobs? And that's really a key. So that's where the incentives come in. There are several essential conditions that businesses require. I mean, they've got to have an adequate skilled workforce. That's foundational. That's why your workforce development center is so important. You've got the quality of life down pat here. There's some infrastructure is average. It could be better, especially with the broadband and the fiber. But first and foremost, companies, they've got to remain cognizant about their overall costs. And so they know that their shareholders in the marketplace will accept no less. So initially, especially, cost is everything to companies moving in. So incentives can and often play a role in securing this company, this location, this expansion. And let me emphasize that 95% of all cities and counties in Texas utilize these programs, 95%. So without meaningful programs, you will be handicapped in this wealth creation effort with primary employers. It's just a must-have. The challenge is assuring that the program is effectively structured and reflective of your local priorities. And they ought to be used properly in a manner to maximize your return on investment. So that's where it becomes a more art form than science, is that having good leadership to make sure that they're used wisely. So this last Friday at the LGC meeting, we talked about these things. And when we talked about where we are today, I looked at your appraisal district numbers, and your ratios of residential to non-residential is very lopsided. It's 87% residential, 13% commercial, or I would say non-residential. The state average is 40-60 the other way. My home county now, Comal County, is 5446, and we're considered heavy residential. And they work very hard every day to raise the second ratio percentage of 46 because our cities, our county, our school districts know that without commercial tax base, it is hard for local governments to provide services to their citizens. So that 8713 figure there should be a big wake up call to everybody that there's some real opportunity here. A lot of opportunity. So again, with these agreements, I'll start with the Chapter 312. That's the tried and true, been around for several decades. The tax phase-ins, tax abatements. You're under no obligation to provide them to anyone. Eligible enterprises have to. I would suggest they match up with your targeted business sectors. You've used 100% in the past for some of the years that they qualify for. The maximum under my proposal is 70%. I think the average over 10 years is about 55. And there's some criteria in there for buy local and hire local, which is very important. Again, you're committed to with the Chapter 381, which is the more flexible, wide open policy. I think what it says at the bottom says it all. If your goal is to have to protect your fiscal ability in the county, if you do that, you can provide your high quality services to citizens. But without that more commercial tax base, it's going to be harder and harder for you to do that. And if it's skewed toward the residential taxpayer, especially in the era of homestead exemptions and over 65 tax freezes, you're losing out to inflation every single year. You're going to have less and less real dollars to put back to pay for needed citizens services. So I gave preference in your Chapter 381 policy to projects that contribute to needed county infrastructure investments. Again, you're under no obligation to provide incentives to any applicant. I put a minimum taxable value there of 10 million for a new project or a company that hadn't been here before, 5 million for one that's here now. If it's in a downtown area of Rockport or Fulton, I lowered the threshold. Normally those are retailers, and they're usually paying sales tax, which is very important for cities and counties to have sales tax income. Also put a provision in there that they pay at least 10% above your average wages, because again, you want the way you could bring up everyone is to have the highest wage possible. Also provided at their request at the city, tax increment financing policy. And again, that's where you take a designated area, usually in a downtown, and you draw a boundary, and anything new value that happens there goes toward paying off bonds for the public infrastructure that you put in. But in some cities and counties, they have used them in underutilized residential areas, which is sometimes a good strategy that they want to bring a neighborhood up. But I cautioned in the policy that when you do that, property values will rise. And that's to some an unintended consequence of development. But some cities have mitigated that with tax incentives for the current residents. In other words, they've frozen the existing residents in that area that were impacted so that they weren't impacted initially when that happened. So there's ways to get around that. I'm not recommending that you use a TIF in a residential area. Again, it was asked for downtown commercial areas. So again, it's a tool you could use. And finally, public improvement district or PID policies. That's the one I told you about. 100% of the property owners in a commercial area decide to tax themselves more than what the tax is now to pay off public improvements. So there's a policy for that for the city. And with that, Judge, that's my presentation. I'm sorry you and Commissioner Castleline had to sit through that twice. I tried to change it up a little bit.
I think I've got something out of this one too. This was a presentation by Meeks and Associates, and we will open it up to the public for comment, but I'll limit it to 5 minutes per person. And if you're a group, then I would suggest that there be one spokesperson for the group. Ms. Rutledge, please identify yourself.
Good morning, Judge, Commissioners. My name is Christy Rutledge. I'm here today to kind of speak on this on general. These policies have been developed by the EDC and whatever attorneys over the last 9 months. In fact, I think these policies kind of came into fruition and ideas shortly after the hurricane as long-term recovery plans were made. I want to talk a little bit about the two policies for the county. I'm not an attorney. I've barely had a chance to look these over. There seems to be some things that you all need to consider, and I think Mr. Meek touched on it a little bit, and that's the cost to the taxpayers, to the homeowners, to the current residences that are here. With all of the economic development policies, and I've read most of them, the workforce center, the hospital district, the micro hospital, those have come with potential taxing districts. And so I see that here also in these two tax policies, that we might be creating a special tax district for the Economic Development Council, possibly for the Rockport Cultural Arts. So I'd like for you commissioners to do your homework on that. I'd like for you to come back to the taxpayers and tell us what is the cost to the taxpayers for these policies, because these are ideas and there's a lot of generalities here, but there's no real detail about what the plans are, and I suspect they're already made. It appears like the Harborfront is going to get developed through a tax increment finance. I want to point out to commissioners that tax increment finance is not let yet in the state statute for counties. So the county is not legally authorized to do that. Proposition 2 on the state ballot for November includes a tax increment finance for counties, but that is not legally authorized. So my question to you commissioners, and I'd like for you to do your homework on this, is are some of these proposals that are being presented today, do they include tax increment finance? Because I see financing in there for private businesses. Are those banking on a future passage of a constitutional amendment that we don't have yet, Proposition 2, so check it out. And come back to the taxpayers and let us know, because you have a responsibility to us, the people who elect you. I'm a little bit concerned about the 2 private boards that might be set up to tax compliance boards where these finance proposals could be made to. I don't feel as if current residences should be funding bonds for private businesses. I think if businesses will succeed here, they will do that on their own. It's not a private market. And so I'd like to see you concentrate on that. I've read the city's policies, but I haven't read all of yours. And the tax increment finance policy for the city talks about a zone for downtown. And that zone for downtown would finance private businesses, but it says in there specifically, policy considerations are that it will cause the home appraisals for the entire city, and this affects our county because we're very small. It's going to affect our county, everyone who lives here, not just a specific region or a zone like Mr. Meek mentioned. It's going to affect everyone. Cause our appraisals to go up, making housing affordability issues worse. This is something that commissioners should look into, come back and let us know what this is. Give us some ideas on the paper, some real numbers, do a study, give us time to know about this and learn about this before you come and ask us to approve something that is going to change our way of life. I am not opposed to the development of downtown. I'm opposed to being taxed out of my home. I'm opposed to generational families who had worked really, really hard to come back after Hurricane Harvey. Some of them got HUD financing. Some of them got Habitat for Humanity rebuilds. These are all government finance rebuilds, and now the government is coming in with these outside entity proposals to fund private businesses to rebuild downtown, but it could make housing unaffordable here. And the policy for the TIF in the city specifically states that residences are at risk of being displaced. So there's a recognition there that these TIFs are risky. And I think that The commissioners, you have a responsibility to look into that. I, again, am not opposed to development of downtown. I understand that this has been a desire for a long time. I'm not actually even opposed to growth. I am opposed to not knowing what's ahead and for not having full disclosure. So that's what I'm asking for, full disclosure. What is it? Don't put these private boards in charge of deciding our future and whether it's affordable for us to live here or not. And working families, teachers, things like this.
Thank you, Ms. Rutledge. Your 5 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you. And keep the accountability here at the local level with our elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Public has finished speaking. I would appreciate a chance to talk.
Certainly.
There's a provision in these policies that concerns me a lot, and that is a supermajority required for undoing any policy that we adopt in the near future. I feel that if there's going to take a vote of 4 out of 5 commissioners to modify or repeal a set of procedures, then there ought to be equally a 4 out of 5 requirement for approving the procedures in the first place. Actually, would prefer that we're not in either case. And for that matter, there ought to be a 4 out of 5 vote required to approve any tax abatement proposal. I think it's a bad idea to make it harder to get out of something than it is to get into it. So I just generally object to any supermajorities required for anything.
Okay. We need to talk about when and what format we want to set up for public input in the near future, and when you would like to do that. And also talk about when you want to come back to the Commissioners Court for action.
May I say something
Yes,
before we
ma'am.
get into
Certainly.
that? Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Meek, for your presentation. You mentioned workforce needs in several areas, and I only saw one location where you talked about workforce housing. I think that is our first critical need here. You also talked about medical. I think that actually we are doing fairly well in attracting medical services here. CCMC came here and set up a much needed ER. We did have grant resources available, and we were able to attract 2 medical providers here that will help expand. And I see that one of the dialysis centers is now becoming an urgent care. Not sure when that'll open, but that's a good thing. I have the same concern that Commissioner Lawbeck had about the 3/4 of the members, which would be 4. So a supermajority. I agree that if we're going to do something like this, to get into it, needs to be the same number to get out. And so if we're going to say supermajority for that, then a supermajority to pass the resolutions would be reasonable. I am concerned about several of the assumptions that are made in these documents, that we could have a more effective government if we just had these abatements. I am not sure that abatements imply that we will provide higher quality services to the people. I think you can do that without abatements. And hopefully we have been doing that. If not, then shame on us. And that we are setting up an economic development program, essentially, when we already have the economic development entity that is under the LGC. That seems like a duplication of effort. And I'm not sure we need to do that. The mention of targeted business sectors and to require, if they're going to be downtown, a certain amount of business investment. I am very concerned about what goes on in our downtown area. The fact that we would allow people to come in and expand a business and consider them for an abatement. But if someone came in and purchased a business down there and just wanted to refurbish it, renovate it, we would not consider them. I am against that. I think if we can preserve what we have, that's a good thing. If we can bring in other things, that's good too. But certainly not to recognize that some people can come in and buy an existing building and make improvements to it and increase its value and not be considered for one of these is counterintuitive. I have heard for a long time, and I hope it's not true, that there is great interest in developing the downtown waterfront for gambling and casino use whenever that's approved by the state legislature. Fortunately, the state legislature can't get those votes. But with the nebulous wording and the fact that you're going to grant extra money for new and non-competitive type businesses to what we already have, would seem like you are laying groundwork perhaps for that industry to come to town. And I have many relatives who live in Lake Charles, and they cannot speak favorably about the changes that have been made to that community since gambling and casinos came in there. And I just would mention that TIFs have been used throughout the state. I'm not very familiar with them, but a constituent of mine has informed me that recently the state Supreme Court in North Dakota and the US Supreme Court found them illegal. And they won't be using those anymore in the future in Bismarck, North Dakota, or their county, or in that state. Thank you.
If I could speak again, the judge mentioned the question of public input and how we're going to set it up for considering these proposals, but I'd also like to talk about the procedures for public input into future decisions by the Commissioner's Court on particular tax abatement proposals. Now, I'm pleased to see in these proposed policies that we're saying they'd have to be approved by the Commissioner's Court in open session following at least 30 days prior notice to the public. I think that we would do well to be very specific about what the public will be entitled to see, because I foresee future controversy over putting something on the agenda and the public not having adequate information from which to judge what a tax abatement proposal will be about. I would like to see it made very clear that anything we get to see in the way of evaluating proposal is provided to the public at that 30-day period. I think there may be some complications, and the county attorney's office will have to help us with anything that a proposed tax abatement receiver might provide to us that would be considered, private or proprietary business information. But my inclination there is to be awfully strict about those rules. I feel that if somebody wants to bring a business into town and spend their own money, there may be all kinds of things they're entitled to keep as a trade secret. But if they're asking us for a tax abatement, pretty much anything they're telling us about their projections for growth and their projections for impact on the community and jobs and income and so forth should be fair game for the public. I can't see a reason to keep any of that secret. Now, I know that the procedures also say that we preserve the right to consider in closed session anything that the Open Meetings Act specifically allows us to keep private. I would hope that would be limited entirely to things like, the legal impact on us that we need to discuss with counsel. I just really don't want to see that kind of general economic development exception included in the Open Meetings Act ever to cover our ability to know something about what a new proposed tax abated business is going to do here economically that we, withhold from the taxpayers and voters. So far, these procedures are a good start, but nowhere near as specific on those points as they would need to be before I could ever vote for them in an upcoming meeting. As far as the upcoming meeting goes, I hope there will be a long period during which this recorded meeting can go out to the public and the public can review the documents we're looking at. I don't particularly want to see it on the meeting after this Monday, the 2 weeks after this Monday. I think more like a month would be a good idea. We've been talking about this stuff since the hurricane 4 years ago. And a lot of people have put a lot of work, but more or less in private, into developing all the procedures. The public is just now getting a rollout today. And there is not a time pressure on us. If there were, we should have done it a year ago. We should give the public plenty of time to review these procedures and talk to us about it before we try to hold a meeting and vote on it.
I think you're right. I think 30 days is very reasonable.
I have a problem with that.
Mike, is the couple of things that they talked about, the 30-day public notice and the supermajority to change, is that a common thing in other places or?
Yeah, I'd have to apologize on this supermajority deal because that caught me off guard. I don't recall having that in there. And these were developed by multiple, the best and brightest of various cities and counties. But if I missed that, that was not my intention to put that in.
It's on page 11.
I understand.
Get rid of it then.
I'm sure it's
I-
there, but that's certainly, I would think that the vote you had to bring it in, it would be the same vote you would need to take it
I
out.
would agree with that.
So my apologies there. Now, as far as the 30 days you mean the 30 days to consider this again?
Yeah,
Oh,
well, in the public notice or the
Public
time
notice
before
for
you would
public
bring it.
hearing, comments to come in.
We're talking about 30 days. One's right now, at least 30
Right.
days before we have our meeting to
Sure,
approve
sure,
some
sure.
procedures. But the other is in the future, let's say in December, somebody comes to us with a tax abatement proposal. I'm interested in building into these procedures really clear and really robust rules for what the public can expect to see and how many days before we actually vote on it do they get to see it and how complete will it be?
sure.
It kind of gives
Sure.
you the impression that it's got to be voted on within 30 days of the people turning it in, which
Well,
I think it's
it says
realistic.
At least, I mean, we're allowed to get more. This is a minimum notice requirement. And that's what.
Yeah, that is born out of when a county would work really hard to get things done. And then they get everything adopted and send it out to a company and it sits on the company's desk for over 30 days. I know in Comal County and Guadalupe County, it said if you don't have it inked in 30 days, then our deal's off. That's where that was born of.
That's a completely different.
I
notice
understand.
issue.
I understand.
And I don't really have strong views on how long a company should get to sit on a proposal. I mean, obviously, most offers have
Sure.
an expiration date. I'm not that concerned about that one. I'm really concerned about what is the minimum time and the minimum quality of information the public, the voters here get before we as a commissioner's court sit and approve a tax abatement proposal. I don't want to see it come up on an agenda on a Wednesday and we vote on it on the next Monday. I'd like to
Mhm.
see, and the 30 days is good. I'm happy to see it in here. It won't mean much though, unless it is a very
Yeah.
complete
Right. One of the
disclosure to the public.
One of the benefits of having this policy is that it also builds in the need for you being in control of getting back from the company their financials, cost benefit analysis that your staffs can analyze in advance. And then they need to brief you in closed session, if it is proprietary, about whether or not this is viable or not. Because your professionals are going to be in negotiations. And so we tried to make it very clear that the county was in control of this process.
Now
in
you're
this.
talking about protecting the commissioners. I'm still concerned about protecting the public. Anything we do in closed session does our public disclosure no good at all. So while there may be things that we have to discuss in closed session, I want to be incredibly clear about what we must give the public. Not, we don't, that won't help people if we tell you we're going to do a tax abatement proposal, we're going to vote on it in 30 days. We have lots of good reasons to think it's a good idea, and we're not going to share them with you because they're
Right.
secret.
Yeah, unfortunately, some things that companies have to remain proprietary until it's done. But that's going to be something that you're going to have to work out with your legal staff. But in my experience of 33 years in the business, time is money for corporations. And certain things like their financials will have to stay private. Now, what you want to disclose to the public regarding the deal, that's public. But as far as the company's financials, they're probably not going to want that out. That's
What
not-
led me to say earlier, if they're using their own money, I think they should keep it secret all day long. If they want our money,
Well,
should not be a
again, and that goes back to them filling out the cost benefit analysis. All that information is going to be in there. And I would never propose that you would do an agreement with somebody unless there was a need, unless there was a gap. If they have the financial abilities and it's not a win-win for the county, I wouldn't do it. So, but again,
that's not really what I was getting at. I basically was saying, if they have sensitive private assumptions they need to make about their financial future, and those are essential to our deciding the tax abatement is a good idea, but they're sensitive about the public seeing them, then I think they should get by without our tax abatement.
well, and again, that's going to be your call. And that's why these policies give you that control. But every one of these, I don't think you could ever develop a policy that's going to answer everything. It's going to give you a template of how to proceed into each deal.
It gives us the discretion to withhold it from the taxpayers. It's a template I will never support, is all I'm saying.
Sure.
Right.
Jen, did you find any other things that you picked up on reviewing it?
The Commissioners Court was provided with drafts of the documents that Kim shared with me, and I did make some red line changes and additions to. I think Mr. Meeks did touch on it, that this is up to you. This is up to the Commissioners Court, what these documents contain. These are suggestions to you, but there are some provisions in here that are set forth in statute, but many that are not. And so if there are provisions that you don't like, or provisions you don't see that you think should be here, those are definitely things we can talk about. This should be what works for our county. And it's up to you, because you're the only people in the room that I know of have the ability to make the decisions to decide what that means and what's best for our county. There was nothing in here that struck me as being illegal, if that's what you're asking. But I did go through and add some definitions and some more provisions to make it easier for a reader to understand what the policy's purpose is and how it would work in reality. I want to point out, though, that there may be a couple of other things we need to be thinking about. The reinvestment zone, Mr. Meeks did talk about the TIRZs. Right now, it's not clear in the law whether counties can create a reinvestment zone. The tax code seems to say that we can, but the Attorney General says we can't, so we won't. And there is a policy that Mr. Meek created and that Kim provided to me related to creating reinvestment zones that specifically says that until we're given explicit authority to do so, that the county would not do that, that may participate with a different political subdivision through an interlocal agreement. And I do think that's another policy that we should probably be looking at in addition to the documents that were provided to you today. There is a lot of need here as far as having things in place so that when and if the opportunity comes along that the Commissioners Court believes in and thinks is the right thing for this county, that we have the policies in place for that to be an option and not rushing to create a policy at the last minute to make ourselves receptive to that opportunity. That's just my 2 cents, but also some of that was my legal opinion. I hope you know that Mr. Meeks obviously did a lot of research on this, and I know has done this for other communities. I'm really excited to work with you guys and with long-term recovery and Mr. Meek to do anything I can to help. And I also understand Commissioner Laubach and Russo's comments, and I think we'll take that back to the drawing table, Kim and I, and look if we can see if we can make some revisions to the most recent draft to address some of those concerns you brought up today.
That's good.
Well, I would also like to mention that I have a concern that we are determining the pay rate that the companies would provide. We are setting a competitive market wage and saying there are, I believe, 3 options for what they can pay. And I do not think that's the county's business. If it's a private company, I think they need to pay what they feel.
And I agree that it does seem that way when you're looking at it. The MCW, the already predetermined market rate is a statistic. It's a number that comes out from a different agency that we could use. This is if you're focusing on job creation. Please correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. But the wage provision that's in there is related to the job creation provision. If you're going to give an incentive to a company to locate here based on job creation, you want to make sure that you're getting quality jobs. And the only way to do that, people have found, is to have something in there saying we won't accept creation of 20 minimum wage jobs. We will accept 20 jobs where the person working there is full-time employed, has benefits, and makes at least twice the minimum wage or whatever number you choose. And it's just for that one company. It's not for everybody else, but that's in exchange for getting the incentive they're getting from the county. And you don't have to do that.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so you want to try to set a public input meeting sometime in the next 30 days? You want to talk about a date today or?
around first week in November, we would have a public meeting and solicit public input.
Be fine with me.
I have no scheduling conflicts, so.
Okay, vote
There's an election, on that Tuesday.
An election.
on Tuesday, yeah.
But I mean, if we do it later in the week of the election, it shouldn't get in the.
Well, depending on getting a courtroom too, so
I was sort of trying to keep it off of a week where we have
we could
already have it.
Maybe
do it
Thursday.
after hours too, if you want.
I think, I personally hate after hours, but I get one of the most consistent comments I get from my constituents is they really, really, really wish we would do things after hours.
Pretty regular, yeah.
Well, let's set
So the Wednesday, do you think?
Wednesday or Thursday of the first week of November
Either the 3rd or the 4th?
at 5 o'clock.
Commissioners, if it's okay with you, can we make that contingent upon us making sure that this courtroom won't be used for anything else? If there was a jury trial set that week, it could be that it runs past 5 p.m.
Yeah, okay, with that stipulation. The other judges can veto everything.
So we would shoot for probably the 3rd or 4th, a Wednesday or a Thursday.
5 o'clock.
At 5 o'clock, contingent on getting confirmation that the room's available.
All right.
Or at least a room is available to be announced.
That could be
No,
either.
This one.
It
Sounds
could be
good.
either room, but yeah. All right. So that being said, then we'll talk about when we want to consider bringing it to the commissioner's court after that for action. I don't think we have to do that right now, but
We'll see how it goes at
see
the
how it
public
goes.
meeting.
Okay,
What kind of changes get made in the meantime?
if nothing else,
Move to adjourn.
motion made,
Second.
second, Commissioner Russo. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Michael.
Sir.